Most people fear solitude. They associate it with loneliness, sadness, rejection. Something to be avoided. Something to escape from. But not everyone sees it that way. Arthur Schopenhauer, often misunderstood, sometimes called a pessimist, believed that solitude wasn't just a byproduct of genius. It was the condition for it. In a world that constantly celebrates connection, he warned of the danger in too much noise, too much interference, too many opinions diluting your own. He wrote, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone." It sounds extreme, even antisocial. But what if he was right? Think about it. When was the last time you were truly alone? Not distracted, not scrolling, not filling the silence with background noise, but truly with yourself? Because in solitude, something rare happens. The masks fall off. The performative layers melt away. You stop playing roles. You are no longer the employee, the friend, the partner, the child. You're just you. And that can be terrifying. Because in that silence, all the things you've pushed away, the unresolved fears, the buried insecurities, the ignored questions, they all start to surface. But that's the point. Schopenhauer believed that solitude forces us to confront what we usually hide from. It's not comfort, it's clarity. And from that clarity, power grows. You begin to hear your own voice again. Not the voice that's shaped by trends or influenced by your environment, but your actual voice. The one that existed before society told you who you should be. In solitude, you stop being a product of your surroundings and start becoming the author of your own thoughts. But here's the paradox. The deeper you go into yourself, the more you see the world as it truly is. Solitude doesn't disconnect you from life. It reconnects you to truth. Solitude isn't just about being alone. It's about learning to exist without distraction. It's a state where your identity isn't constantly shaped and reshaped by external noise. In solitude, the masks fall away. You stop performing. You meet yourself, sometimes for the first time. But most people avoid this meeting at all costs. Why? Because in silence, the mind speaks. And not always gently. It brings forward questions we've buried, regrets we've ignored, fears we've numbed with endless scrolling, noise, and dopamine. Solitude forces you to confront what you've spent a lifetime evading. And yet, Schopenhauer saw this confrontation not as a punishment, but as a purification. In solitude, the superficial dies. The need to impress fades. What remains is essence. When you detach from constant stimulation, your mind regains clarity. You begin to see through the illusions of status, validation, popularity. And you realize how many of your choices were never truly yours. Schopenhauer warned us, the more intelligent and independent you are, the more likely you are to feel alienated in a world built on triviality. But that alienation isn't a weakness, it's a mirror. It shows you how disconnected society is from anything truly meaningful. And if you can endure the loneliness that comes with this awareness, you gain something others never will: self-sovereignty. Because the person who is comfortable in their own company becomes unshakable. They don't fear silence. They don't need to perform. They no longer confuse attention with connection. Solitude doesn't mean loneliness. It means presence. Undistracted, undistorted, unmasked. It's not the absence of people. It's the presence of self. And in that sacred presence, something rare begins to unfold. You meet yourself, not the version you've curated, edited, or rehearsed, but the raw, flickering, honest pulse of who you are underneath the noise. Schopenhauer saw solitude not as exile, but as elevation. He believed that the truly thoughtful mind doesn't seek solitude out of disdain for others, but out of reverence for depth. It's not misanthropy, it's clarity. When you're alone, you're no longer negotiating your identity. You're not adjusting your tone, reading the room, or wearing masks to please the crowd. You simply are. And that kind of being? It's rare, it's powerful, but it's also deeply uncomfortable. Because solitude removes the anesthesia of distraction. It pulls you away from the narcotic of scrolling, small talk, shallow validation. Suddenly you're not numbed, you're awake. And with that awakening comes a flood. Regrets you've buried, questions you've silenced, pain you've postponed. This is why solitude feels threatening. Not because it's empty, but because it's full. Full of everything you haven't had the courage or stillness to face. That flicker of sorrow when things go quiet. That ache you carry in your chest at night. That whisper, what if I'm living a life that isn't mine? We've built a culture that medicates solitude. We call it boredom. We call it antisocial. We diagnose the stillness as something to fix. But Schopenhauer warned us, without solitude, there can be no real thought, no originality, no self-possession. He wrote, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone, and if he does not love solitude, he will not love freedom, for it is only when he is alone that he is really free." Freedom begins where performance ends, and performance ends the moment you stop needing to be seen. That's why most people don't fear being alone. They fear being unseen. They fear what they might find in the silence. They fear that, without an audience, they will disappear. But here's the deeper truth. You don't disappear in solitude. You reappear. The self that's been buried under obligations, distractions, and expectations finally has space to breathe, to speak, to be. But solitude requires courage. It asks you to sit without stimulation, to feel emotions without buffering, to be present without applause. Try it. Turn off the music. Put down your phone. Sit with yourself for 10 minutes. Notice what surfaces. Notice what you resist. Notice what scares you. That discomfort you feel. It's not failure. It's the beginning. It's your shadow trying to speak. And if you keep ignoring that voice, it won't go away. It will show up elsewhere. In your anxiety, your fatigue, your burnout. We think we're escaping pain through distraction, but what we're really doing is prolonging it. Because what we resist in solitude returns in chaos. So here's the invitation. Don't run. Don't distract. Don't scroll. Sit, feel, listen. Solitude is not punishment. It's the classroom where authenticity is remembered. And if you stay long enough, it becomes something sacred, a quiet rebellion against a world addicted to noise. In the next part, we'll explore how embracing solitude doesn't just transform your mind, but redefines your relationship with the world. Why Schopenhauer believed that stepping away from the herd isn't isolation, it's initiation. A path not to loneliness, but to mastery. But before we go there, ask yourself, when was the last time you were truly alone, without distraction, without performing, and didn't try to escape it? Solitude doesn't just offer reflection. It creates the conditions for genius. Some of the greatest minds in history, Nietzsche, Kafka, Woolf, Thoreau, found their breakthroughs not in crowds, but in silence. In that sacred space where thought is not interrupted by approval, and truth is not diluted by expectation. They withdrew not because they hated others, but because the collective noise of the world made it impossible to hear their own minds. Because to truly think, deeply, originally, you need more than intelligence. You need space, psychological space, emotional stillness, the kind of spaciousness that only solitude can give. Schopenhauer didn't romanticize loneliness. He didn't claim that cutting ties with others made you more noble or more evolved. What he offered was more dangerous, the idea that originality and depth are incompatible with constant company. He wrote, "Ordinary people are sociable and like to surround themselves with people. But whoever has intellectual power avoids crowds. He knows that great thoughts emerge only in solitude." Why? Because when you're constantly adapting, pleasing, mirroring, your thoughts are never fully your own. You're processing, yes, but not integrating. You're reacting, not creating. In solitude, you stop reacting. The performance ends, the script is gone, and what's left is raw, unfiltered truth, the parts of you that haven't been curated for approval. And that's terrifying. Because most of us don't realize how much of ourselves is shaped by others until we're alone. We think we know what we want, what we believe, who we are. But often that's just inherited noise, cultural pressure, parental echoes, social survival mechanisms. Solitude strips those away, not with force, but with silence. And in that silence, something deeper is revealed. You don't just uncover thoughts. You uncover motives. You trace the roots of your fears. You see how many of your ambitions were never truly yours. It's like standing in front of a mirror that doesn't flatter you, just reflects you, exactly as you are. And most of us avoid that mirror because we fear what we'll see. But here's the paradox. Only by facing that discomfort can something new emerge. A new voice, a new rhythm, a new sense of self, built not on noise, but on stillness. This is the power of solitude, not escape, but revelation. It doesn't separate you from the world. It prepares you to re-enter it with clarity. Because once you know who you are apart from performance, you stop needing constant validation. You stop chasing applause. You stop confusing connection with attention. And something begins to shift. You start choosing depth over distraction, quality over quantity, presence over performance. Solitude becomes your home, not your punishment, your refuge, not your exile. And in that space, a subtle kind of freedom appears, not the loud, rebellious freedom of doing whatever you want, but the quiet, grounded freedom of finally knowing who you are when no one's watching. The kind of freedom that doesn't beg for company. It invites it, with discernment. And if no one comes, it still stands. That's the kind of presence only solitude can teach. Solitude isn't just about hearing your own voice. It's about separating it from the noise of the world. Because for most of us, our thoughts don't come from within. They echo. Echoes of parents, of teachers, of headlines, of algorithms. We think we're choosing our beliefs, but often we're just repeating them. Unaware, unquestioned, inherited. And this is the gift, no, the confrontation that solitude offers, the peeling away. In the silence, without distractions, the echoes grow louder at first. You hear them all. The judgments, the expectations, the inner critic who doesn't even speak in your voice. It's disorienting, sometimes terrifying, because you realize just how much of your life has been lived for someone else's idea of you. Schopenhauer knew this well. He didn't just advocate for solitude, he defended it. He called noise not merely an annoyance, but a violation of thought, a theft of clarity. In a distracted world, solitude isn't a luxury, it's protection. It's the firewall between you and unconscious conformity. But solitude isn't peace right away. At first, it's withdrawal, like coming off a drug you didn't know you were addicted to. The constant stimulation, the social cues, the subtle approval of being agreeable, likable, normal. When all that fades, what's left? At first, chaos, then fragments, then slowly, your own voice, unpolished, unpopular, but yours. And that's when the deeper work begins. When you finally start to ask the dangerous questions most people avoid their whole lives. What do I actually believe? What do I value when no one is looking? What part of me have I silenced to keep peace with others? These questions don't offer comfort. They offer confrontation. But that confrontation is the beginning of freedom. Because the person who's willing to be honest with themselves is no longer easily manipulated, no longer desperate for attention, no longer addicted to belonging at any cost. And once you've faced yourself fully in solitude, once you've walked through your inner noise and come out clearer, you stop moving through life on autopilot. You return to the world with sharper vision. You see through performances. You notice who's listening and who's waiting to speak. You feel when a space is true and when it's hollow. Your presence shifts. You begin speaking less but saying more. You choose fewer people but deeper connections. You make slower decisions but stronger ones. Because you're no longer reacting, you're reflecting. And when you move from reflection, not reaction, everything changes. Your relationships become more honest. Your goals become more aligned. Your energy stops scattering and starts landing with precision. Because clarity doesn't come from consumption. It comes from solitude. And in solitude, you don't just hear your voice. You reclaim it. True solitude isn't about isolation. It's about liberation. Not from others, from illusion. Schopenhauer didn't romanticize loneliness. He wasn't advocating for some heroic withdrawal from society. He simply saw something most of us spend our lives avoiding. That in solitude the masks fall, the noise fades, and the self stands naked. No titles, no achievements, no audience, just you. And that is terrifying. Not because solitude wounds us, but because it reveals the wounds we've never dared to face. The ones we buried beneath performance. The ones we silenced with stimulation. The ones we edited out in the hope that if we were likable enough, loud enough, successful enough, we might finally outrun the ache. But in solitude, there's nowhere to run. And that's the point. Because growth doesn't happen in applause. It happens in stillness. It happens when you realize that everything you've been trying to prove was never required to begin with. Schopenhauer saw solitude as the philosopher's crucible, not because it was peaceful, but because it was purifying. It strips away the inessential. It burns off borrowed desires. It confronts you with questions that cannot be answered by trends, metrics, or validation. Who are you without your audience? Who are you without your armor? And more importantly, who are you becoming when the world is no longer watching? The one who embraces solitude learns to stop outsourcing their worth. They stop performing connection and start cultivating depth. They move from reaction to reflection, from noise to nuance, from mimicry to meaning. They begin to sense something deeper than happiness, clarity, something rarer than acceptance, integrity. And with it comes an unexpected kind of strength, the power to be misunderstood and still remain grounded, the courage to walk alone and still feel whole. And when they re-enter the world, they do so differently, not needing to be understood, not craving to be accepted, but choosing, with fierce clarity, what is worthy of their time, their energy, their soul. Because solitude doesn't shrink you. It refines you. It teaches you to distinguish your voice from the echo chamber, to choose truth over comfort, to create from fullness, not from lack. This is why solitude, when chosen consciously, is not a wound. It's a rite of passage. But here's where the story turns. Not everyone will understand your clarity. Not everyone can walk with someone who no longer clings to the herd. And as Schopenhauer saw clearly, this often leaves the most intelligent among us on the outside, not by force, but by nature. Because the price of true awareness is alienation, at least for a time. And yet, that very alienation might be your proof of awakening. So before you seek to be more connected, more accepted, more included, ask the deeper question: what if the very clarity you've earned is the reason you no longer belong?